The morning my sister fired me, the building felt colder than usual. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the way people who once greeted me now avoided eye contact, pretending to type, pretending to be busy, pretending not to know what was about to happen. I had been part of this company since I was 19. I had worked in every department, learned every system, and stayed late enough nights that the cleaning staff joked that I should start paying rent. But none of that mattered now. Not when my sister, Mia, had decided that the company belonged solely to her, and that I was nothing more than an obstacle she could sweep away. She stood in my office like she owned the air I breathed, leaning against my desk with the same smirk she used to wear when she stole my toys as a kid. Except now, the stakes were higher than some plastic action figure. She held a termination letter in her hand, printed on company letterhead that I myself had approved years ago. It was almost poetic. "You're done here," she said, her voice light, almost playful. "Dad wanted you to run things with me, but things change. The board thinks we need a stronger direction. And honestly, you slow things down." She smiled like she had rehearsed that line in front of a mirror. I didn't react. I had learned long ago that reacting was exactly what she wanted. Mia thrived on drama, on watching someone crumble under her words. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. I simply looked at her, then at the letter, then at the window that overlooked the entire city, the same view Dad and I used to stand in front of when he told me the company would be ours someday, not hers or mine alone, but ours as a team. Mia pushed the letter toward me. "Go on, sign it, or I can have security escort you out. I wouldn't mind watching that either." There it was, that laugh. Sharp, mocking, dripping with the kind of arrogance that came from never having worked a hard day in her life. She was handed things. I built things. That was the difference neither she nor the board understood. I signed the paper, not because I accepted defeat, but because I knew something she didn't. For months, I had watched her make reckless decisions. She slashed budgets in departments she didn't understand. She overpromised to clients we couldn't afford to lose. And most importantly, she ignored every warning the finance team quietly whispered in hallways. The company was bleeding money under her leadership. I hadn't spoken out publicly, partly because the board had already begun shifting toward her side, and partly because I wanted to see just how far she would go before the inevitable collapse. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. Mia believed firing me was the final blow, proof that she had power, that she was untouchable, that she had won whatever imaginary competition she had created between us. She didn't notice when I reached for the leather folder on my bookshelf, the one I always kept locked. She assumed it was sentimental, something personal, something she wouldn't care about. She didn't realize it contained documents, emails, financial records, and signed approvals that told a very different story about what she and the current CFO had been doing. I walked out of my office slowly, listening to the sound of my employees, no, my former employees, murmuring behind their screens. I didn't meet anyone's eyes until I reached the elevator. As the doors began to close, Mia appeared behind me. She waved her fingers in a mocking goodbye and laughed again, loud enough to echo down the hallway. "That's right," she said. "Run along. Maybe you'll find another job. Though with your skill set, I doubt it." I smiled for the first time that morning. A calm, steady smile that made her expression falter for just a second. "Good luck, Mia," I said. "You'll need it." At home, the silence felt heavier than the office air. I placed the leather folder on my dining table and opened it like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Every document, every timestamped spreadsheet, every approval she had carelessly signed was there. The company wasn't just struggling, it was on the edge of a financial breakdown that could destroy hundreds of jobs. And Mia was too arrogant to notice what she had triggered. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted the company to survive. I wanted our father's legacy, the one he trusted us with, to not collapse under incompetence. So I made calls, quiet, strategic calls, to board members who still respected me, to auditors who owed me favors, to partners who preferred stability over ego-driven leadership. I didn't tell them Mia fired me. They would find out soon enough. I simply shared the truth hidden in the documents, the risks, the inconsistencies, the warnings ignored. By the time the sun set, the storm had already begun behind the scenes. Mia didn't know it yet. She didn't know that firing me wasn't the victory she imagined, it was the trigger that exposed everything she had been hiding. She had pushed me out laughing, believing she had won. But the truth, the part she would discover soon enough, was simple: she hadn't removed her biggest threat. She had just unleashed it. When I walked out of the building with that single leather folder in my hand, Mia thought she had destroyed me. She thought I would go home, fall apart, maybe call relatives to complain, or drown in self-pity. But what she didn't understand was that people who build something from the ground up don't collapse just because someone slams a door in their face. They simply look for another entrance. By the next morning, while Mia was probably sipping her overpriced latte in her corner office, admiring her reflection in the glass and believing she ruled the world, her empire had already begun to crack in places she didn't even know existed. And I hadn't lifted a finger in revenge. All I had done was tell the truth to the right people. The first wave hit her at 8:12 a.m. The board's audit committee arrived unannounced. They didn't send a warning, a polite email, or a scheduled meeting request. They just walked straight past her assistant, stepped into her office, and placed 3 thick binders in front of her. I wasn't there, but I later heard how her smile fell, how her hands trembled when she recognized the documents she had signed without understanding the consequences, documents showing months of financial mismanagement, inflated projections, unpaid vendor contracts, and obligations she pretended didn't exist. The committee didn't shout, they didn't accuse, they simply asked questions she had no answers to. And the moment Mia stuttered, the moment she tried to blame others, the room grew colder. Because nothing exposes a leader faster than their inability to explain their own decisions. While she panicked behind her polished desk, calls were going out from departments she rarely visited. Employees she had ignored for months were now reporting errors, inconsistencies, and missing funds they had been too scared to mention earlier. What she thought was loyalty had merely been fear. And fear disappears the moment the person controlling it begins to lose their power. By 10 a.m., the second wave hit. 3 major clients, the ones Mia had promised unrealistic deals to, sent formal letters pausing their contracts. They cited concerns about financial instability. I hadn't told them anything. I hadn't needed to. The documents I shared with the board triggered an internal review that stirred the entire company, and these clients had long-standing relationships with me, not Mia. When they sensed something was wrong, they called the only person they trusted. My phone lit up with messages I didn't respond to yet. I let them wait. They needed answers, but those answers weren't mine to give anymore. They belonged to the board. Meanwhile, Mia frantically tried to contact the CFO, the same man she had partnered with to manipulate numbers to make her decisions look profitable. But he didn't pick up. He couldn't, because he had been escorted out 30 minutes earlier by internal investigators. The cameras caught everything. Mia rushing down the hallway, calling his name, realizing in real time that she wasn't just losing control, she had already lost it. By noon, the third wave arrived. The board called an emergency meeting and asked Mia to step out of her office, for the time being. Those words, so gentle, so polite, were the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. She tried to argue. She tried to accuse me, claiming I was sabotaging her, spreading lies, plotting revenge. But the board didn't need my opinion. They had facts, hard numbers, signed forms, her own emails, her own decisions staring back at her with cold clarity. Outside the building, I sat in a quiet cafe across the street, sipping tea and watching the glass windows of the office tower reflect the movement inside, people walking fast, security escorting someone, assistants whispering, executives gathering. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. For years, I had carried the company on my shoulders, carrying its weight silently, covering her mistakes, compensating for her ego. And the day she pushed me out was the day I finally stopped protecting her. At 1:34 p.m., I received a call from the chairman of the board. He sounded tired, frustrated, disappointed, emotions I had heard many times during difficult company moments, but never directed at me. He apologized for how things had unfolded, said they had been blind to Mia's behavior, and asked if I could come in to discuss next steps. He didn't ask me to return. Not yet. He simply asked for guidance. That was enough. When I entered the building later that afternoon, employees who had avoided my eyes the day before now stopped what they were doing to watch me walk by. Not with pity, but with recognition that truth eventually rises no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. I walked past Mia's office, now empty. Her things, from what I heard, had been packed quietly and discreetly. She wasn't fired, at least not officially, but she was relieved of her duties pending investigation. A polite phrase that meant her career was over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't search for her. I didn't want to see her broken or humiliated. That wasn't the purpose of any of this. The purpose was to save the company before it collapsed under her leadership. I sat with the board for hours, explaining the gaps, the vulnerabilities, the mistakes, and the path forward. They listened carefully. They took notes. They looked at me not as the brother she fired but as the person who had always known how to hold the company together. When I walked out that evening, the city lights shimmered like nothing had changed, yet everything had. Mia had taken my job, my office, my pride, but I had taken something far more important, the illusion she had built around herself. By morning, her empire had crumbled, not because I destroyed it, but because she had built it on lies. I had simply let the truth speak.